So notice that we need to create all the getters so we can extract the information from a student in order to save it into the database. If you take a look at the class content values, where is it? It's here, Android content values. You might ask yourself, can I transform a student into a content values? There are several ways to do that. The way that I'm doing right now is asking for all the information of the student, grabbing all this information from the student, grabbing all the information, and then putting that information into the content values. And that's why I need to create all those getters. And I might need to create like 10, 12, 50, I don't know how many methods. Might work, and it's a little bit painful, that's true. Another way is to ask the student itself, student, please transform yourself into content values. And then create these content values for me. And then we delegate all this information to the student itself. It's another way just to move this code into the student itself. So I'm just moving the code, the responsibility of serializing this code into a set of key values, into a content value. I'm delegating this information to the student itself. So let's create this method, and within the two content values, we can just paste the code, return the data, and now we don't need to use the getters. We can go straight for the data. Name, address, phone number, website, email, and grading. This kind of transformation, transforming an object into something else, into another type of object in our case, into a type of object which is a map. I could transform it into an XML, into a JSON, into something else. This kind of transformation can be done in several ways. The way it was done before would be that the code that transforms this data into another data, this object into another object, was outside the model. And it's valid, it's one option. If this code is utilized by several different parts of my application, it's common to move this code into one component, either the model, as I did here, or into another component, which is just a factory that transforms students into something else, like a student factory, or a content values factory, or something like that. Factories are common names for those patterns, although it doesn't matter what you call it. So this way, I just extracted the content here, so it's pretty easier to read it here. And if I add a new field to my student, I will remember to put the data here. When I'm saving these students, I remember to get the data and put it here. Because it's here, it's not somewhere else. So it depends on how you see it. Is the responsibility to transforming the data of a student into a content value set the responsibility of a student or the responsibility of the data access object? Whose responsibility is it? And depending on how you answer this question, you want this code here or you want this code here. I'm gonna answer it as, okay, I see this as a responsibility of the student itself, because this class I'm going to be using into the Android environment only, so it's okay for me to depend on a Android content package. It's not a problem for me because it's going to be used only here, and it's going to help me out making it quite clear which fields are going to be transformed into content values. For me, that's how it's working, and it's pretty clear for me that all those fields are going to be saved, but the ID is not going to be saved because it's not here. It's going to be auto-generated. And the student DAO doesn't have to care about it. Now it's much easier. The student DAO just asks, student, please transform yourself into content values. I don't care how. So all those kind of questions, design questions, can be found into several design books on oriented programming, object-oriented programming, and functional programming, or pattern programming, or patterns, design patterns, and so on. So you see all those kinds of discussions on good practices, bad practices, when they are good, when they are bad. And I try to show you here those two options. And for my example, I would guess that it seems better for us to move it here and make it simpler by leaving it here. Okay, so that's where we are going to leave our code. And now we have our application that really allows us to add new students and saves those students into the database.